It's far too technical for me. But I think they will stay in the meeting if you come back to the meeting later. Tarek, hi, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good,
thank you for the invitation as well.
We've used up our buffer time with discussions. So I'm afraid
no worry at all. That's interesting. Thank you very much.
Last lecture. I'll hand you over though to Simon, who's going to be chairing the session.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Tarek.
Hello, Simon.
And hello, everyone. I guess we will jump right in. So today we are joined by Dr. Tarek Teba from the University of Portsmouth. He's a senior lecturer and the chair for ICOMOS UK Digital Technology National Committee. Tarek's research concerns the conservation of tangible and intangible heritage through creating the balance between contemporary values via community engagement and historic, aesthetic and cultural values. Tarek's doctoral research, completed in 2016, explored the conservation strategies and creative design approaches for, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Ugarit, a Bronze Age archaeological site in Syria, based upon understanding its archaeology, architecture, social aspects, and the multiple historic layers and the phenomena that created them. A virtual modelling approach was applied to materialise the analysis and simulate the preservation and engagement framework. This analytical tool made it possible to experience and test the interventions and understand the space, interventions and their interface with the original fabric. Post-PhD, Tarek has explored the interdisciplinary nexus and investigated methodological approaches to preserve the cultural and contemporary social values embedded in heritage assets and cities. He uses community engagement and cultural mapping as an informing tool and a virtual modelling approach as a vehicle to deliver adaptation and development strategies. So we're very pleased to have you today, Tarek, and the floor is yours. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. I am very pleased to speak to Manchester School of Architecture, basically one of the schools that I have friends and colleagues graduated and worked in. So basically, it's really a pleasure. So I'll share my screen. Excuse me, because it's the first time I use Teams in this way. Apparently, Teams disappeared from my computer. So I think I'll use my desktop as a whole and then share my presentation. So do you see my presentation now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
And is it on full screen?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So thank you everyone for showing up today. I'm really pleased to speak to you today about a piece of work we have done in Egypt, but particularly centering the presentation today about what community means to us as designers. Of course, as Simon mentioned, my background in heritage conservation, but conservation to me and heritage to me is doesn't have dimensions, because the heritage exists in different forms, different categories. And that's what I'll do today, basically, to show you how in urban design, basically, how we approach learning from heritage and how community play a key role in the exploration, starting with some key terms and key theoretical aspects, and moving to show you what we have done as part of the Middle Eastern Heritage Hub project, particularly in Egypt. So yes, I wear many hats in the School of Architecture. I am course leader for conservation, but also more engaged in research management. I am the REF coordinator and leading different research groups, faculty-based, but also external research group, particularly the new formed Future for Defense Heritage Network, which basically is very related to the topic of today, because it's about how we can bring back those and integrate those massive, gigantic sometimes structures into people life after being disposed by the MOD. But also I I am interested in digital technologies as a tool and vehicle, and that's where I work with colleagues in ICOMOS to push the best practice in using digital technologies at different or to support heritage in different dimensions. But my talk today is basically about heritage. But heritage, as I mentioned, is understood in different ways. In a way that many people, when we mentioned we are talking about heritage conservation, we all go, or our minds go directly to archaeological site, historic buildings, castle, or those symbolic buildings that clearly has historic, social, and aesthetic values. But today I'm talking about a very particular example I'm interested in is the living heritage, particularly talking about old cities that is still living and continuing to live, and basically are under pressure of the demand required from cities in terms of economic, social, and spatial development that is applied, where the old town always has the pressure coming because of the expansion. So that's why basically we sometimes the demand from cities and the demand from developing cities because of the needs of people and the growth of people number, but also requirements. Every decade we have new requirements by people, new values by the communities assigned to their built environment. And I'm here moving a bit to historic built environment or built environment because they are mingled in the city at the borders between the old and the new towns. So that's really important to understand that to preserve and conserve historic towns and keep them as living heritage, continuing to support the community, continuing to manifest their values, but in the meantime, responding to the economic requirements, we really need to meet the sustainable development. And what I'm referring here about, we really need to create the balance and understand the balance of sustainable development pillars, social, environmental, and economic. Unfortunately, nowadays we can see huge pressure is happening to respond to the economic pillar of sustainable development. There are a lot of attempts to maintain the environmental pillars, but especially for historic towns, we have little attempts to really consider the social pillar as an integral part of the economic and environmental development. So that's why basically the community here is a crucial vehicle and a crucial assets, because when we are developing cities, we can't develop cities for no one. We really need to think about who we are developing the city for, why we are developing it in this way, and does this development plan meet their aspiration, particularly talking about their contemporary social values. Because of course, when we talk about living heritage, we are talking about changeable, transformed heritage based on the development of the needs and the values. So for the sustainable development, we have really quite different reasons for the collapse of this kind of, if we name it, structure or equation. First of all, the governance of the city and how it works. I'm talking about administrative side of developing the sustainable development could lead to unbalance of developing those pillars and maybe sometimes missing one of those pillars or so. But also unbalance of considering those pillars is really crucial, because as we can see nowadays, there are many cities are developed purely based on economic development, the economic pillar. And we could see recently Liverpool losing its heritage status, for example. That's really a warning for all designers. I'm not really addressing here heritage scholars or heritage professionals. Designers have responsibility to really think about the heritage asset of the city when they are developing city, when they are planning cities. Here I'm meaning by designers, planners, including urban designers and planners, of course. So that's why basically we need to think about this balance, and we can see clearly in the academia, but also in professional life, there are a lot of attempts and a lot of concerns for the environmental and the economic. And that's why I really want to talk more about the social pillar and how we really think about city and how we really need to start taking city into another dimension by considering its value, its social value, but also its people, its community. So that's why we really, when we deal with the historic built environment as a way to reviving it and expanding it and bringing it to the current time, transmitting it to the future as part of the conservation strategy, we really need to think about different values and different meanings this built environment holds. So, of course, we are talking about a very generic concept, but basically in general, ancient cities or old towns really accommodate symbolic identity and urban social interaction meanings. And they are different levels of meaning. The symbolic meaning is always clear, but not really taken into account. But the most important meaning is the low-level meaning, which is this urban social interaction, is about the vibrant and dynamic urban environment and how people perceive and use the city in different ways. Because this value or this level of meanings is changeable over time. The symbolic meaning and the identity meaning are always hard to really change over time, apart from a radical change happened to the old town. But basically, the low-level meaning and the social meaning of the city is transformed every generation based on the value and the requirements of the historic period this city is passing by. So that's why basically when transforming the city and developing the city need really to take strictly into account this urban social interaction dynamic and consider that, because it's the best way really to start thinking about bottom-up approach into developing historic towns and keeping them alive. And this, of course, in terms of symbolic meanings, we have many scholars talked about this particular aspect. And Joseph Reckford is one of the key theorists, historians, who wrote and talked about cities a lot, and ancient cities in particular, and the concept of city. And that's why basically when he talked about the components that make a city, like the site, the enclosure, the materials, he meant a lot by or learned a lot from historic towns. But basically he wanted and he emphasized on learning from historic towns, these historic towns, to transfer this learning to contemporary city, and particularly about his emphasis on the material dimension of the city and how this material dimension is represented by the urban and social dynamic that really make the city character and make the city identity, and at the end contribute to the city symbolic meaning. Because any city, any heritage asset, if it's not if it's either it's a static heritage asset that is ruins, or very static, not changeable, and the value is anchored to its static value and historic value, or it is a changeable, transformable structure that move based on the society requirements and aspiration. And that's where the material component of city in Joseph Reckford approach is basically referring to how people aspiration can be met by developing this material alongside the historic periods. And of course, that's why basically when we talk about the Joseph Regvart notions, and when he assigned some characteristics to city, we can see nowadays basically only the public dimension and the public characteristic of city is taken into account, where the secret and bristly characteristic, when he described city in this way, are not really anymore taken. That means the social anthropological basically dimension is not really anymore of concern, particularly by planners. So nowadays the planners are looking at cities as an object, an economic but not social object. We have very few planners who really take social dimension into account. We talk a lot about consultation that is not working, because I'll talk about consultation later, but consultation, this top-down consultation process doesn't work when you are trying to construct city and or regenerate city, because regenerating cities and designing cities, so urban design principles are capable really to develop social structure of the city, not only the physical structure of the city. And that's really important to be recognized, because the social contemporary values of communities can be made and can be reinforced by the way we readjust or redesign the city, or readapt the city, or revitalize the city. And that's why it's really important to take that into account in order really to allow the city to develop with its people and with its community. Otherwise, the city will become a very either economic or environmental oriented, and people will lose interest, and over time will lose values assigned to the city, particularly speaking when we talk about the historic cities or old town. Many examples I can tell you about. Just a very good example is a recent campaign we did with Architectural Heritage Society of Scotland, when they, if you have heard about this St. James development and the Spiral Hotel, where that was installed in the connection point between Carlton Hill, old and new town of Edinburgh. So this has been a very big event in Edinburgh, and still really community talking about this ugly structure, if I may say, installed to change the skyline of the city. But not only that, but basically allowed community to express anger about how the city is treated. If we go through that route for a long time, many of our cities will lose their social values, and community will not really be interested anymore in our historic context. So that's why basically working on the material and thinking about how the city is transformed as part of as an organic component, not really as physical, as our organic living component, is really important, because we don't really need to free city, but also we don't need to free it completely for economic investment. We really need our old towns to develop slowly and confidently based on people aspiration and people consultation, in a bottom-up consultation, not top-down consultation way. So that's why we really need to start thinking about the balance between structural and phenomenological approach to developing our towns and regenerating our historic environment. In a way, allow the urban spaces, we talk about urban landscape scales, where people use and perceive the built environment, to allow these spaces to be constructed based on phonological and structural approach, or the meeting point, at the meeting point, based on the meeting point of these approaches, rather than one overtake to the other, because the phenomenological approach alone will not be really beneficial for the city economic development. The structural approach alone will not be beneficial for the city social values and the community enjoyment of the city. So we really need the balance between these two approaches in order really to start thinking about the regenerating of cities in our historic environment. So that's why basically we, when we talk about those spaces, we need to talk about or to think about all elements that allow us to start thinking about our urban environment. And of course, Kevin Lynch is one of the key scholars who I really learn a lot from reading for, particularly the image of the city everyone should have read in architecture, where he in simple way, in a very accessible way, explain the city and explain the different components of the city and their relationships as very basic concept to develop the city image. But in the meantime, we don't need to forget that when developing this image, we really need to upload it by the social dynamic, which basically the soul of the city, and to keep the city living and vibrant for a long time. And basically, that's why basically the old towns are considered as organic creatures or structures that has been growing based on people requirements and people values. Only when the modern time come, basically those cities started to respond for more economic pressure, and that's why this economic pressure, although started at the edges of the city, but nowadays is adding pressure to the old town and adding pressure to the old town to regenerate itself. And that's really key moment in our in 21st century, when we are thinking about all old towns around the world, how we really can accommodate this pressure, which we can't really avoid. This pressure will keep pressing into our old towns, into our historic environment. How we can accommodate it and then allow this city to regenerate itself. And that's a big question. Of course, it's not a question that I'm going to answer, but it's a question that we take forward in exploring the one of the key projects as part of the Middle Eastern Heritage Hub, just to compare between the vernacular urban historic environment and the new urban sprawl, and what characteristics designers can learn from each of them, and how we are losing really by not learning from our historic environment. The development of this old town of Edinburgh it looks clear what the urban structure is clear to us. The urban artifacts, the castle, the palace, the Royal Mile as a key vine in this city is clear to us. But the development of the city around those three urban structures is very organic and very non-structural in a way, allowing like identifying clauses in order really to accommodate certain functions. And if we visit the city of Edinburgh now, we can see each clause or two are dedicated to certain function or certain activities, which will keep the old town of Edinburgh up running. But till when? We really need to start thinking about 21st century methodological approach to the regeneration of old town, to accommodate the economic pressure and mitigate the environmental impact. So just to keep the interest in our built environment and allow community really to be part of this game, not really to be outside, either by working with them, co-design, co-making of place, or by taking or learning from their practices, their social and creative practices in the city to inform the new development of the old town, or even the regeneration of a new urban. That's what those are key basic concepts we take forward basically to inform our approach to different projects we started exploring as part of the Middle Eastern Heritage Hub. So the Middle Eastern Heritage Hub is a collaboration between different countries: UK, Italy, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt. So those countries, of course, this hub has started as to talk about heritage and different challenges, but it ended up to form kind of collaboration through which different projects have emerged. One example of these projects is the Regenerating Cities British Council funded project I'm running currently. We are in later stages of it, where we are looking at the city of Amman in Jordan from different perspectives, from environmental, social, public space, and heritage perspective, in order really to come with different regeneration strategies for the city, considering its local challenges. Of course, this consortium, let's say, is continuing to perform, and currently there is an attempt to work with Syrian University on particularly urban and architecture education for post-conflict period. But in 2019, just before the lockdown, the hub got funding to establish key projects in the area. And one of these key projects were established in Egypt around the city of Alexandria in particular, because the collaboration was with the city of, the University of Alexandria. So the key themes we took forward in this project is heritage and community, heritage and conflict, heritage and smart and creative technologies, and heritage and smart and future cities. In a way, we started thinking about what the local challenges the urban and historic environment is facing, what we can do to really mitigate by small interventions to mitigate these aspects. And one of the key challenges we found that the historic environment is suffering from community disengagement, not appropriate valuation process, and particularly speaking, there is no valuation of how the historic environment perform, and the new urban sprawl are just using typical planning rules to generate a new urban environment that is really meaningless for the community that they are living there. So that's why basically we established 4 key projects in Egypt. One project has looked at learning from vernacular historic environment and how we can inform or take some social values to inform new planning process or new planning framework. But we extended this project into looking at some, particularly it was during lockdown, by looking at some heritage assets and how these heritage assets could create better lockdown environment based on their architecture and the landscape settings. But we didn't really forget about community, and we started exploring some projects around how community engage with either planning or heritage, but also how community can inform and take a role in the valuation process in the country. So, of course, there are 4 projects. I'll give synopsis of each project in order really to get your head around what we did and how community is an anchor between these 4 projects. So the first project, when we explored a vernacular town called El Hawaitat in Egypt, and we started analyzing the social value of this urban environment, particularly during the lockdown. How social interaction worked during lockdown within this vernacular historic environment in comparison to the urban sprawl, new urban sprawl. And the results were astonishing because we found out there are great interaction within this historic environment, mainly because of its hierarchy and its urban and landscape hierarchy, and people felt like very safe to be out with neighbors. So basically we run more within this vernacular historic environment in comparison to the urban sprawl, new urban sprawl. And the results were astonishing because we found out there are great interaction within this historic environment, mainly because of its hierarchy and its urban and landscape hierarchy, and people felt like very safe to be out with neighbors. So basically we run more spatial analysis to understand the key social interaction points in the city and in the town, and how basically they are distributed within the urban fabric. But also we looked at more also economic economic focal points, economic and social focal points. I'm talking about market, mosques, supermarkets, but also some other key locations where basically community has interest in order really to understand how these focal points and key open spaces have performed during the lockdown and supported the community. So based on the analysis, we started identifying key open spaces where we run more close exploration about social interaction, like using observation, but also following these observations with interviews with people to understand their perception during this tough period of lockdown where people are scared to be infected. And of course, we try to map social interaction. And if you can see from the color coding that even outside, some people might expect that basically within the open space that is between the blocks is more safe environment, so people might be exposed more. But we found out that that's happening, yes, but more focal points outside the blocks were attracting people as well because of key social practices, talking, or even socializing, or kids playing, but also this key creative practices where they either worked on fixing some boats or doing some artistic work in the area or in the public space. So you can see basically social activities were diverse, and different spots of this area had different social interactions. Either some places are related more to women and the children, some other spaces related to elderly, some other more open spaces adults were playing and socializing in the same space. That's why basically the hierarchy and the composite of this urban environment helped a lot in creating those pockets of social practices that were completely missing in the urban sprawl, which basically used primary, secondary streets and blocks to kind of distribute the accommodation. Let's say, I would name it accommodation, not really residential or neighborhood, because it's really following the block of apartments that sometimes people don't know each other in the same apartment or in neighboring apartment, while the story is different here. Around the focal public space, all people know each other, even from different blocks. So these are more mapping of key social practices. You can see very simple environment, very vernacular environment, but basically very hybrid compared to the new environment. And that is what I call contemporary social value. If we are designing a new development of cities, why don't we really take those aspects? Why don't we know the people we are designing for in a better depth and explore solutions that make them safe, but also enjoy the new built environment they are living in? So in the new urban sprawl, clearly, people were fixed into their flats during the lockdown because they were not really feeling safe to go out because they don't know anyone. And the urban environment is quite open in a way. They didn't feel really safe to interact with people they don't know suddenly in the street. So these are key observations of the same vernacular town, where you can see some creative practices that engaged community outside the block and allow them really to go, some particular type of community to go out and feel safe to engage with these assets. Moving to key historic buildings in the city of Alexandria, we try to explore as well how the architecture and built environment can contribute to the healthy environment and resilient lockdown, and by comparing some heritage assets that could have been used basically for lockdown more than and more sufficiently compared to the schools, for example, used in Egypt to mass lockdown or apartment for individual lockdown. So this is what we call Khan, or every country name it in different way. It's a complex of, originally, historically speaking, is complex of commercial and residential use in the top floor, used for more traders to come really and this kind of publicize or invest their work in different cities and stay for a few days in the residential section. But we found out that basically the configuration of such buildings, which are many in Egypt, by the way, is really well suited to create mass isolation for people during lockdown, during COVID-19 lockdown. Those buildings were kept closed because they are more cultural centers now in contemporary time. So they are designed to have individual rooms. They are designed to have open space. They are designed to have vibrant social interaction with basically social distancing already. So that's why basically it's a pity to close such asset and not really use them to push forward better lockdown for people and basically send people to schools to sit in non-healthy environment. Not only that, but only from scientific point of view, the materials used for building this building, which are stones, are less infectious compared to the new buildings which use cement and concrete. So it transmits the virus, scientifically speaking, transmit the virus less compared to the concrete. So we run a more empirical study for these apartments and house. We select one historic house and one wakala, they call it in Egypt, khan in other countries. And we started exploring architectural, but also social kind of configuration of these buildings in order to understand how it would work for lockdown in comparison with the schools and apartments respectively. Moving to community and moving back to planning, we started exploring how community can integrate with their historic environment and can have a say. And one of the key challenges in planning system now is to include community in consultation. And that's what they claim now. They can't really run a very holistic consultation because there are no sufficient ways to consult community. Particularly speaking, we are in planning, they are losing the voice of young generation, which of course not engaged with the planning process, simply speaking because the planning process is not using the tools to talk to those generation and attract their attention. That's why when we started exploring heritage assets or even valuation process in Egypt, we started thinking about what methods and tools we can use to attract people to have their say. So particularly speaking, when we are talking about planning, we started exploring the two dimensions of engagement, the competencies of communities and the way of engagement they prefer. So one project we run around the historic gardens of Alexandria, well-known heritage asset in the city. So we run a very wide questionnaire with community to understand their contemporary social value of this heritage asset and what they like in these historic gardens as an attempt to inform future plans of the city in reviving those gardens. So what we assessed, basically, we assessed two dimensions, as I mentioned before, the competency of using technology, but also the way of technological interaction community like. And these are mainly for two reasons. First of all, during lockdown, there was a point basically where the city was looking for particular approach to engage community virtually with these green spaces, and the answer was clear. They from the community questionnaire, which basically 50,000 answers we received for this questionnaire from the city. Different people, different occupation, young and adult and elderly participated. The young are definitely more because of the way we designed the questionnaire and what media we used to transfer this questionnaire, especially using Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all these media that young generation are using, but also using very simple Google form to allow elderly people to do it very sufficiently. In a way, the competency was also a crucial point because we understood that although young generation are interested in technology, but there is basically less desire to go for more complex VR, for example, models to engage with these gardens, rather than there was clearly tendency to 360 interactive engagement, where they like to have barcode where it takes them to a 360 on their phones or on their laptops in order to learn from. When I say interactive, basically the 360 reconstruction or photos or videos, but with hotspots inside it that help to learn more about certain artifacts in the photo appearing in the photo, and the same as you go through the journey. So it was surprising to me, particularly speaking, I've been exploring virtual technology for a long time, but the community there were not confident basically to go for, and not interested maybe as well, to go for virtual reality reconstruction, rather than they wanted more a version that is more controlled on their screen and their laptops. Of course, the analysis of the data brought clearly there is some lack of competency, but also it's the culture of technology is not really yet flourished in Egypt to use virtual reality in the intensity. But also we moved to another story where we started thinking about the valuation system, and that's really still working in progress, where we started thinking about what the current valuation process in of heritage asset, how they nominate heritage asset to be listed or even for UNESCO is shocking, basically, because it's very top down. It's very selective committee that decide about these heritage assets, mainly because, of course, historic period, static value, other dimensions that come directly from literature. So the point here, intangible values, so contemporary social values, and even the way and how, or the potential of how these heritage assets could be really revived is not taken into consideration. So basically, we are talking here about a system. Of course, it's not, I'm not criticizing the Egyptian system per se. It's a system is applied in most Middle Eastern countries, where basically nominating heritage asset clearly driven by facts, which is fair enough. Facts are important. We really will not bring a building without all these values to nominate it. But basically, there are other dimensions that could bring more interesting historic or either architectural, landscape, or urban historic structures that can be nominated either for listing in the country or even for the UNESCO, more international recognition. And that's why we started thinking about sorry, the concept of cultural mapping and how, the concept of cultural mapping and how this concept can really help in creating a framework for valuation in Egypt. Of course, this cultural mapping methodology is mainly about how we can inject the contribution and the understanding. Is not about what communities say, but understanding the community, what they value, what they assign to this their heritage is important in order really to move confidently to consider the fact and those social aspects in the valuation process. Sorry, we are in the process of validating the framework and through a more international expertise validation method, and in preparation for publishing it soon, and hopefully testing it in a couple of cases. That's why basically why I insisted on the word community in the title, although I didn't really bring examples of working with community of co-creation or co-design, because we really need, before we arrive to the concept of co-design or co-creation or co-making, we really need to consider community in the valuation and in the appraisal of the heritage asset before we arrive to working with them, because otherwise we are applying top-down approach and asking them to do what we have already identified for them. I hope that was useful. I meant to speak for 40 minutes. It's almost 45 minutes, leaving time for questions from the audience.
Thank you very much for that really interesting talk, Tarek. I'm especially intrigued in heritage because it comes from also my research background and interest in this idea of living heritage and as you described, low-level meaning actually being kind of a fundamental ingredient in, as you described, the urban social interaction. We already have a question.
Yeah.
So I would also advise all students to consider either raising your hand or putting a comment, but we'll dive right in with Dimitra, who has a question.
Sorry, the question was, does every picture you click?
Sorry, no, this is from the previous talk. Dimitra will ask a question, I think, over video.
Thank you, Tarek, so much for your presentation. I actually had a question regarding your epistemological approach, because you mentioned at some point you argued for a balance between phenomenological understandings and structuralism. However, then within the presentation, you also argue for community and trying to understand things from a bottom-up approach, and including the different voices of the people. So I'm wondering, what role does phenomenology play in this approach exactly, and how do you propose that we maintain that balance, and why should that balance be maintained?
Yeah, a very interesting question, and basically thank you very much for asking it, because to highlight this relationship between, because understand phenomenological or seeking the balance between structural and phenomenological approach is basically the phenomenology doesn't need to come from theory per se. Theory help us to start being explore more this notion, but phenomenology should come from understanding the social aspect of cities in order really to when we think about the phenomenological dimension of city, we are taking the people voice with us. So when we when I advocate the social aspect and the social understanding is mainly to inform the phenomenological dimension but to balance the structural dimension, because structural dimension nowadays, of course, it's informed by different theories, Aldo Rossi, Kevin Lynch, which basically very useful to understand how we can structure city and create a more dynamic environment. But without the social and phenomenological dimension, this physical spaces can't really be designed in the best way or put in the right place without understanding how people behave and how people will perceive them in the first instant. And that's why basically knowing the people first is important. So we put ourselves as designers in the shoes of people to understand how they will perceive a square or a pedestrian route open to a garden, or when we design the structural aspect of our built environment. Particularly speaking, if we are intervening to historic environment, we really need to be careful how we draw this intervention, not draw in paper, but how we draw it into the spatial settings in order for people to apprehend it, but also appreciate it. I hope it was clear now.
Okay, yes. I agree definitely that we should take into consideration people's voices. However, I would disagree epistemologically that that's a phenomenological approach, but that's for a much longer discussion. I'm gonna
definitely. I mean, I appreciate your point. Phenomenology is a very it is considered top down as well in some cases, but for me, phenomenological approach exactly about maybe it is about the use of that terminology here, because it's mainly about the perception of the space when you immerse to the when you understand people, when you immerse to the people perception, how people will perceive the space and how you can design it in a way that people that you are designing for will accept and engage with it. That's the point. Maybe the terminology, I should have used different terminology. Maybe you are right. in this, but this is the meaning of the phenomenological approach that I advocate in this way, in this social dimension.
Great, thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you, Dimitri. We'll move on to Tao now. Tao has a question. So Tao.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, my question is that I completely agree the heritage and the community we need to keep and focus or emphasize this value for this heritage. But when we meet our clients or the commercial development, how do we convey them, and how do we improve those values, deliver this value to them, and let them to agree us to apply those heritage value or community value, because many of us at the beginning maybe we have the angle from the community, from the social, from the environment to think about the product, but some of the clients may more focus about the commercial value. Then after complete process, maybe our initial idea have changed by then. So I want to ask, how can I insist our angle or our value?
Yeah, a very, very interesting question. And not only the client, I would say, when you are dealing with historic environment, you have also the planning permission requirements and all these very, very tough process of, especially if you are dealing with listed buildings, if you are dealing with conservation area, there are a lot of complication. The point here, definitely, I'm not really here advocating a purely social dimension, because from the beginning of the lecture you could see that the balance is the important, but the problem, and you are referring to it, the economic dimension, the client requirement is taking over. The main point basically here is how designer can really understand the situation and understand how short and long economic revenue can come from a heritage asset to propose the best intervention to it. Of course, very important, the planning permissions will help you a lot in a way the client can't ask you to use a listed building in an appropriate way. That will work for your favor in a way, but will work against you, because that will also limit your design capability when you are dealing with historic listed building. So that's why my advice is a critical evaluation of the case, a very in-depth understanding of the case you will be working with will help designers to figure out economic impact of the proposal at short and long-term time, in comparison to basically or to accommodate in the kind of the financial plan or economic plan a clear evidence of the client profit, but without really impacting on the heritage, social or historic dimension. Of course, it is a dilemma that I'm not here to solve it, because it's bigger than all of us. But as designer, when I am given a project, of course, I really need to have my say in it, because I'm dealing with a historic environment. So I really need to get the best advice. It's like a lawyer. When you are advised, when a lawyer advises a client, they need to give the best advice, but with showing the benefit of this best advice. So in a way, building critical, like in-depth analysis will bring all potentials of this asset you will be dealing with, and then bringing a proposal that show how you salvaguard the historic, but also most importantly, how the historic asset and the social asset will add really to the economic rather than it is something separate, because I can tell you many people are proud to be in listed building, for example. Many historic buildings are transferred into very well good social hubs, including restaurants, all activities that generate economic values for clients. But how we approach that is the important point. Basically, how we really appreciate the historic fabric, but also the social fabric, to propose something that works for the area, because you at the end you will need to warn your client if what they are coming with, what agenda they are coming with is valid or not. But it's not easy. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very quite interested about this part, like at the beginning this background, like
exactly. I mean, it's big equation to governments are not meeting it, I can tell you. But as these, I mean, I believe designers they have the talent and the creativity to find solutions. The solution is not administrative. The solution is design solution for this big problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tao. And we have another question from Girish.
Hello.
Hello, Girish.
Yeah. Hi. Am I audible?
Yeah.
So basically, my concern was related to something which is on the other side of the heritage, which is being demolished earlier. So basically, a few years back, I was doing a competition of Syria post-war housing, a matter better competition of Arc Delhi. And that time I was facing, I mean, I'm still having those questions till date, because what if we are designing something in terms of architecture, in terms of urban design, in terms of anything, in the area which is already have a history, but it's not there completely now. So do we need to follow, or maybe is there something we need to follow, like the smart sustainable or something into that thing, or shall we look at the other perspectives which were already there in the back of history and try to design something related to that?
Very interesting question, and I have PhD student who do something closer to that, but in very particular point. So you mentioned about Syria post-war reconstruction, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is you know, I'm from Syria.
Yeah.
This is a very touching topic in a way. There are a lot of attempts to reconstruction in Syria. I would fail all of them. Honestly, currently, I would give 0 to all these attempts. I don't know if you have heard about Marota city in Damascus.
Yeah.
All, I would say, non-environmental, non-social, all just economic and political. Has economic and political dimension. By the way, my point is not coming from political opinion. My point is coming from very professional opinion. In a way, basically, all these attempts are addressing just political status or economic status to grow multi-story buildings and bring more expensive, I would say, accommodation for people. If you look at the prices, follow Marota City Facebook, you see the prices at some point. And the prices are astonishing. It's not for people who are living there. This is number one. This is economically speaking. But basically, post-war reconstruction need really to, although I appreciate we will be dealing with fully demolished area sometimes. We are not going to reconstruct house by house, but we can learn a lot from the Syrian social and cultural heritage to inform contemporary architecture and urban design characteristics. Very good example that I showed you in Egypt. So in Egypt, the new urban sprawl, 1 kilometer from this vernacular town, is just following governmental typology, primary road, secondary road, and then blocks, ignoring whatsoever to learn from how people live in this. So we don't have to reconstruct the area as it was at all. In Syria, if you really need to bring affordable but also social aspect to the new development of the post-war, particularly speaking, to encourage the social sustainability dimension in the urban environment, we really need to learn from people way of living, values, social and cultural practices, in order really to design something that work for this. I can tell you example. You can't really come to a specific area in the city of Homs, my hometown, and design, for example, like residential buildings that is fully glazed. Just as example, it's happening. I can tell you in Marota city is happening, but in a very particular area, like close to the old town of Homs, people have very particular social, religious, and cultural aspects we really need to respect, although we are designing fully new environment. But also the environmental challenge of these buildings, if you adding more glass, we know how it's happening in the Gulf period, is they are just overheated structures and need a lot of economic input really to cool them down. So in a way, basically, we can learn a lot from in the environment and the social and cultural values and practices to inform completely a new development. I believe you come through Masdar City before.
Yeah.
Masdar City is, I would say, a good example, a good example that really started to manifest the way of people living in the outside space, in the inside space, using, for example, just as example, the concept of mashrabiyya transformed into contemporary style, used in a very different way. It's just a rain screen cladding, for example. So in a way, we need to learn from the past, but not to really to reconstruct it. Otherwise, we go to the trap of nostalgia. We really learn from the past to revive the future based on social, cultural, and heritage assets that the past hold for us.
All right. Yeah, I think I got the answer what I'm looking for since last few years. Yeah.
It is amazing what's happening there, but basically it's everything is happening is part of the chaos anyway, still part of the chaos. There is no organized attempt to think about the reconstruction of the country in a way that respond to the country characteristics in a way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Girish. And thank you, Tarek. I think we're now slightly over time, which is always a positive sign of great engagement from the students. So I'd just like to again extend our thanks from the MSA for coming and giving your talk today.
Thank you very much for your invitation. It's a pleasure, and thanks for all questions. All of them are really interesting and valid, and really looking forward for meeting many of you in the future as well.
Brilliant. Well, we'll end the talk there then. Again, thank you, Tarek.
Thank you very much.
And we'll pick up with the students at 2 o'clock. So
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, so we will end it there, everyone, and we will be seeing